you, and you'll have the answer in that presentation to that. Right, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon also on my behalf. And first of all, I would like to thank all the organizers for making this happen. I think that many of you have had a particular interest on when we were negotiating the LULUCF regulation, and I think it's something that you want to hear more. Do you hear my voice, or should I take the microphone? How is it? Microphone. Is it now good? Better? Okay. So, is it now? No. Sounds great. Now?
No. Still not. What is going on?
Yeah.
This one is better.
Do you hear me now? Yes. Very good. Okay, thanks. You heard already, I hope. And I believe that I will not have the precise number yet. I cannot yet tell what is the forest reference value for the first 5 years for Finland. But instead I intend to provide a little bit of reflections, and when we were talking on inviting me also here, it's also to little bit reflect and speculate if there are any implications and what those might be in the future. So shortly I will try to provide a little bit, one slide only on the Finland, that's Finnish specific. Then some of the key points, how we understand what is the LULUCF regulation actually about. A little bit repetition what you already have heard, but having different angle, and I think that might be enriching to you. Then what we are doing in Finland to prepare the forest reference level, a little bit of speculation on possible implications, and then I think we have spent quite a lot of time on this quite technical topic, which is the forest reference level, and I think we somehow, including myself, we tend to lose the bigger side, which is that we need to look a little bit beyond on the role of forest in terms of climate change. So the first message I want you to understand, of course, is that in Finland the land use sector, and in particular forest, is a big topic in terms of quantitative terms. The bigger first picture here is that the overall emissions in Finland, the blue one divided according to different sector, it above 70 million, 75 million CO2 tons a year. And then the overall LULUCF is a green bar here, is illustrates the difference. So when the forest or the land use sector as large is almost 30 million CO2 tons a year in last year's, the emissions are already something like 60 million, so you understand. And then when we look on more specifically how it's distributed, LULUCF, between the forest land, green, and the harvested wood product, you see that the forest represents almost 40 million CO2 tons a year, compared to the overall emissions that might be something like 60 million CO2 tons. So in quantitative terms, the forest is a significant sink compared to overall emissions in Finland. And the second one, of course, if those who were more closely following the negotiations, what happened between the years 2000 and 2009, the harvesting level, which is the main dominating factor of how the things fluctuate each year, is depending on global markets, and during that period the harvesting rate was declining, and that led to the situation that forest sink was increasing. So the question on the intensity was very heavily debated, very intensively debated also in Finland. Okay. What the LULUCF regulation is about, and I think that was what Simon already said, is to link LULUCF into broader EU climate and energy framework, what we are pleased is that the LULUCF is a separate pillar in some regards because it has certain characteristics that deserve it to keep as a separate pillar. But also important is that EU needs to operationalize its international climate commitment, contribution to Paris Agreement, and here we speak nationally determined contribution. And together with the ETS, ESR, energy efficiency, renewables, that's the overall package that sort of provides EU's contribution to the meeting the Paris target for the first 10 years. And then, as San already said, there is LULUCF has this no debit target, and that will be as accounted in the regulation. And again, it's of course its focus is at national level. There is no provisions to the individual operators, and also it does not set any guidelines for land or forest management. So I think that's important to understand that this focus is to be done at the national level. Of course, countries may think policies on how they implement LULUCF regulation, but for the time being, at least in Finland, we don't have any plans because we believe that sustainable forest management is a good approach to long-term climate mitigation management also in this regard. Some of the reflections why I believe that negotiations were rather difficult. I think Giacomo already referred to the past accounting system, and I call it historical burden also in this regard, that we have had very complex discussions in the past. I have had the privilege to be in this forest accounting already since 1997 in Kyoto. And I remember after we concluded the first round of negotiations and we had quite complex accounting system for forest, we were hoping and dreaming that we would have something more simple for Kyoto 2. That did not materialize. And then now, as we did it for third time, it seems that we are getting all the time more and more complicated system. But that's how. But we do have this kind of historical burden with us. I think it's extremely complex technically. I think there are not that many people who fully understand all the technical details on this one. And then especially when you start to...
The microphone does not work anymore.
So, is it better?
Yeah.
Okay. I speak too slowly. That's my only explanation. Okay. It meant that the negotiations were extremely difficult because how can you negotiate, how can ministers and parliamentarians negotiate something that's technically so difficult? And I think that created quite a lot of headache to all of us. I think one of the topics that we sort of were highlighting that the LULUCF sector is different compared to the other sectors. And I think we have had that debate also within our colleagues in EU, but also domestically. I have sort of characterized that there are two major differences of the views, fundamental differences. Some people believe that reduced sink is same as emissions. I do not believe that, but I think I can tell that openly. But I know that some people believe that if you reduce sink, it's same as emission. And I have not found that articulation anywhere, not in Framework Convention, not in Kyoto Protocol, not in Paris Agreement, not in EU legislation either. The second big difference is that do we need some kind of additionality to the accounting of forest sinks? And I sort of tend to characterize that these are the two major differences when you have the deep root discussion with people. And I think it's good that's why I wanted to share with you that whenever you hear people arguing on something, it might be that the root cause normally tends to be on those two fundamental questions. I think there has been already discussions that member countries are very different in this regard. The magnitude of LULUCF is so different. the perspective how the forest should be treated in the future. And of course, there is a political way within countries and between countries that varies significantly. My sort of lesson learned is that the accounting, what we see now, it's a result of the political negotiation. I'm not criticizing, but I think we all need to realize that it is a result of political negotiation. And in this regard, it's not a scientific equation. In the end, the decision makers, they ask how much is too much and how much is enough. And that's where the deal normally are made. And I think it's important that whenever we look at legal text, that certain provision or sentences may have been agreed earlier stage, and then you continue on certain other element in the text, and that leads to the situation that there are sort of elements in the final decision that don't always match perfectly to each other. But I think it's important that we understand how we came into that conclusion where we are now. And a discussion that we had in our country was that what is actually the motivation of this forest reference level, how high we put the bar. And then the question is that is this some kind of collectivization of forest things in overall? That's the debate that we have. But that's part of the history. Let's look now where we are now. Finland is a process, like any other member country, to prepare the forest reference level. Deadline is by the end of the year. To us, it is a technical exercise. It is a technical exercise which is carried out by our researchers in Finnish Natural Resources Institute, and they are sort of making the calculations for forest reference level as well as they are writing the report. Of course, as the legal text is very complicated and our researchers, they have not been engaged in the negotiations. That's the role that we as a civil servants who were more closely involved, we have been spending quite a lot of time with them trying to read together with them how the legal text should be interpreted and what is the intent and what is the background for the text that we have in front of us. And in this regard, we believe that the exchange of views between different experts, as well as number of workshops, and also the guidance documents seem to be very useful. Because it is quite complex to see that how can we put this little bit of unclear legal text into operational practice, and it's not an easy task. And that's why, for instance, in Finland we have been a little bit slower to get progress on this work, because it was more complicated than we maybe anticipated in January. What I believe is important is that there is no only one single way of preparing forest reference level. And we welcome this kind of diversity, because it's not only that the member countries are different, but also we believe that methodologies should be diverse in order that we are able to develop later on better methodologies for setting up the forest reference level. But the key requirement for us, of course, is the transparency, and that's important to maintain. In Finland, we believe that we have relatively good database, and we have experience in modeling, so these should not be a bottleneck for us, but still somehow our experts are very much overloaded with the work on this one. The approval in Finland, what we intend to do is that we follow the standard EU procedures, so we will provide the draft plan to our technical EU committee, in where we have also the stakeholders and representatives of different organizations and ministries participating. So it's sort of coordinated approach that we do normally in Finland. Simon may not be any more in the room, because my question actually was that make available in internet. It's still a question mark. If somebody has a good idea, should it be done before the forest reference level is submitted or later? I don't exactly remember, but to be honest, I don't find it very useful from my perspective. Ordinary citizens, of course, it may not have that much to comment the English report, but because we guarantee the experts and all stakeholders to comment it anyway. The challenge we have seen is the time is extremely short. And then what I have realized, including myself, is that we need to look the regulation with fresh eyes, objectively. So we tend to sort of continue carrying similar kind of interpretation of the legal text as we did on the original proposal by the Commission. And we believe that the content of the regulation changed significantly during the trialogues. Then we have the technical review next year and then the final approval. Now if I go for the possible implications, I have faced those in 4 boxes. First one is what are sort of possible implications for the time being. One is that for the preparatory phase I call this year until end of 2020, there is a demanding workload to experts. And we have already learned that there is a need to improve the data modeling base even in Finland. What we have observed that the forest reference level provisions include some that may not be so operational. For instance, this requirement to have that the forest reference level should be based on constant ratio between solid and material energy use. I don't understand how can we sort of operationalize, or does it have any implications in the end? Because if we do prepare the forest reference level based on this age-related dynamics, I don't quite understand how we could operationalize this one. I have told our researchers that I expect that when we will have the technical review process next year, it is quite likely that there will be some questions to be forwarded to the researchers. I would be very surprised if any forest reference level from any member country would be automatically as it was originally given. We had that experience in climate review processes, and there is normally a discussion between the expert review team and countries, and I foresee this to happen also with this one. My current assessment is that the forest reference level from Finnish perspective we expect that to be okay. We don't foresee any major sort of problem with that one. Maybe the bigger question is whether the LULUCF target can be met in the end, because the Finland is quite particular country that we have quite other segments of the LULUCF regulation, agri-soil, cropland, and especially the deforestation are expected to create emissions. And because there is a strict limitation how much forest credits can be used to offset the other land sector emissions, there is a big question mark whether we will reach zero target in this regard, even though that political agreement includes the special clause and compensation for Finland, but still there is a big question mark whether we will be able to reach that one. But as I told, the current understanding is that the forest reference level would probably not be a problematic for us. Then of course what will happen in 21-25, we will have the constant greenhouse gas inventory. These results are to be seen 2027, and then we will be preparing the next forest reference level. The following period, the same happens, that we will know the results only by 2032. I will be retired, I hope, by then. And then we come to the question that are we able to use the flexibilities and how much? So it is quite a long process still. I mean, it's 15 years from now that we can say the implications. And then, of course, there is a possibility to start to transfer units between the ESR and then the LULUCF sector, as well as between the member countries if that's needed. So I think that's quite a long time that we will see the implications in the end. I think the overall implication is that I would characterize that this LULUCF regulation is not a carrot approach. It's more like a stick. And why I say that there are so many stringent limitations how much forest can be used to offset emissions in other land sector, and then there is so stringent limitation how much LULUCF sector can contribute to EA's effort sharing. So and even though that there is a full responsibility that you may gain very little but you may lose quite a lot, and that sort of is somehow imbalance, and that leads to in our thinking that there is not much stimulation to action in forest, to be honest. And we tend to believe that it's more like we try to avoid the risk that this would not create additional burden to Finland, but there is rather limited possibilities to gain anything because of the LULUCF regulation. We try to get the one example is that whether the harvested wood product is there to, for instance, luckily that may increase the cap, but our researchers for the time being are saying that they don't know how in the earth in the end we could sort of get, even though that we would increase the use of long-lasting wood products, we still don't understand how we would ever get any benefit of that. And then of course the question is that does this limit our opportunities for transforming our economies to bioeconomy? My final point is that I think we need to look, we have spent quite a lot of time on forest reference level, negotiating, and now of course it has to be implemented. But equally important is that we start to look beyond. And I think it's the first question, of course, is what is the best way forest could contribute to climate change. And I think the old school said that we have 3 S. We have the sequestration, storage, substitution. And then when we come to practical forest management practices, I hope that most of us we could agree. We need to reduce deforestation. We need to implement sustainable forest management. Some people may call it just climate smart forestry. Some other people emphasize adaptation practices, so they may wish to call it adaptive management. We highlight the multifunctionality, which means that we, at the same time we are managing forest for various purposes. We want to transform our societies towards the more bioeconomy based. We want to promote the long-lasting wood products, new products, etc. In short, I hope that we can agree on that one. Then the question is that what kind of policy framework we could establish. And that's sort of the challenge that we need to start to look sometime in the future. Of course, we would like to maintain the political recognition and predictability for policies, coherence that whatever we do in one area would be coherent to the other sector. And of course what we have been highlighting is that we want to ensure the equal level playing field between countries. As I said before, we would welcome more simplified version for accounting in the future or treatment. However, we need to allow the flexibility and diversity between countries. And I think somebody already here, I think it was Giacomo, you said that the question of lack of trust, and that's something that I hope that we are able to work collectively, because I don't believe that people try to cheat in this game. I think most of the people who are working in this business, they want to act in responsible manner, and they want to promote good things. And I have not experienced that there is a sort of the cheating mentality. And I think this is something that, for instance, that I think it would be important to recognize, acknowledge that there is a constant desire and processes ongoing to improve the sustainable forest management and national level and by the operators. And I think that would be sort of highlighted. And similar manner between the countries, I tend to believe that the good intentions that countries have. And then we need to come finally that are there any kind of incentives that could be explored? And now we come to the question that are we looking for some kind of stick approach vis-a-vis the carrot approach? And I think that to me it's a question. I'm not advocating, but for instance, if the forest contributes 300 megatons carbon a year, if you multiply that by 20 euro, it's quite a big amount of money. 6 billion, for instance, a year. Would it be interesting to look at something in the future? And that's something to think that how far this kind of regulatory approach vis-a-vis new market-based approaches could be feasible. And I think that's something for us, I would welcome us to continue discussions in the future. And then finally, there needs to be this kind of long-term perspective. We work in the forest sector, we understand that there is a need for long-term perspective. In Paris Agreement, there is a requirement that emissions and removals should be balanced by the second half of the century. And I know that this discussion is already going at the EU level. Can we achieve that already much earlier? And then the role of land sector is crucial for meeting that target. And as we all know, we need to make the future happen today. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. We will proceed as during the morning sessions as well. We'll have the talks first, and then when we have time, we'll have questions after this session. So the next speaker will be Florian from the French Ministry of very many things, including forestry. And he will speak of how forestry and stuff will be developed in France. There you go. I'll give you the microphone as well, just in case.
Thanks for the invitation, and I've been asked to present you some elements on how FRL will be developed in France. So my name is Florian Fless from the French Ministry of Agriculture and Food, and LULUCF as a climate topic is under the first responsibility of the French Ministry of Environment. But we are a shared competency on this, and we are working closely with the colleagues. As you will see in my presentation, basically how FRL will be based on the use of two studies. The first one that from 2016, and it was a study of the modeling of forest harvest possibility of liabilities up to 2035. And the second study, so it's the work made by Anu and her colleagues. So strategic climate guidance on FRL. I'll give you also reference below on this slide. So to start, some elements of context on the French forest. So we have around 25 million hectares of forest in France. 2/3 are on the mainland territories, so the big part of France, and 1/3 is based on overseas territories, and mainly French Guiana here. On harvest intensity, as it has been a subject that has been raised in the LULUCF discussions, the historical rate is around 50%. So we have a net increment of almost 6 cubic meters per ton per year, and we harvest almost 3 cubic meters. One of the key elements that is very important on French forest is the heterogeneity. So heterogeneity in terms of ownership, in terms also of biodiversity. We have more than 100 tree species, 2/3 dominated by broadleaves, so you have all the English name here, and 1/3 by coniferous. In terms of commercialized timber, it's around a bit less than 3 billion of cubic meters. Another key element on context is how LULUCF inventory. To read this graph, it's from 1990 up to 2015. The blue one here is a LULUCF sink, and it's a combination of all the land categories. The first one that will be interested in is the red one just below here. So mainly, all our LULUCF sink depends extremely on forest sink. You see also two accidents. It was a storm in 1999 and in 2009. But the trend is that we have a growing sink and mainly a growing forest sink. Except perhaps on the last years, we'll come back on this in the presentation. As you can see also, there is some other sectors, other land categories that are also in credit or with absorptions, mainly grasslands and harvested wood products. And here it's croplands and settlements. Okay, now I will present you this study made by Colin et al. It has been a work that has been managed by my ministry in 2013, and 3 years after we have the results. So basically, it's the idea was to have a prospective analysis by 2035 of the French mainland forest wood sectors, especially the forest availabilities. It has been in the context of promoting sustainable management of forest, and the idea was to increase wood mobilization for several regions, several policies. One of them was an adaptation of forest lands to climate change. And another one was more economic, it was to equilibrate the trade balance. This study has been used in the framework of several strategic policies, so you have all the names here. And it has been also used to calibrate the National Forest and Timber Program that fixes the harvest objectives for the next 10 years. The study is mainly based on two silvicultural scenarios. There is one based on the constant silviculture, as it has been documented on the historical period, and another one was a kind of dynamization of management practices in order to increase wood mobilization, adapt forest climate change, etc., etc. The idea is that the constant silviculture scenario is almost the same idea, the same thinking as elaborating the forest at once level in the LULUCF regulation. You will see that all forest availabilities data has been broken down in 3 components. So material timber, in French is bois d'œuvre, industrial timber, in French bois industrie, and energy wood, bois énergie. Okay, donc to start in the description of the study, the forest certification is based on 116 studies aware. We can call them forest strata if we want to match the concept of forest. It's a combination of several criteria, so the forest cover type, targeted species, ownership category, and some biogeographical regions. You can see here, maybe there is 8 or 9 records. There is a particularities for poplar, but I will not explain this in the details. For the forest dynamic simulator, is based on matrix models, so it's a matrix model for forest elaborated by our National Forest Inventory. Basically, it's run through dynamic rates, growth, mortality, harvest, recruitment, that are calculated each year, and for all diameter classes, for all forest strata. All the calibration of this model is based on statistical estimation of net coming from the data from National Forest Inventory. One key element that have to be kept in mind is that all the simulation have been made with the assumptions of no climate change and meteorological stability. So there is no storm, there is no increase of temperature, no decrease of precipitation, just climate constant. For the constant silviculture scenario, so we have some specific harvest weights. These weights are specific to species and diameter and to forest strata. It's based on the 2005-2013 observations, so you will see that we need an adaptation to match the LULUCF regulation, because the LULUCF regulation is 2000 and 2009. So we have some details of modeling. I will not enter into this case. Okay, so I will take some time to elaborate on these slides. Take perhaps the laser. So here you have the Scots pines, and in the northwest part of France. So basically it's one forest quarter for one species. On this axis you have the diameter classes. Here is the harvest weight, and here is a part of the volume per diameter classes. So basically that means that 80% of the volumes is on the classes between 30 and 35 centimeters. We have other curves. So you can see these two colors, so the blue one, the red one, and the green yellow one. It's harvest weight specific to species and diameter classes. So you can read this in public forest. Here there is 15% of the 50-55 diameter classes that are harvested. It was on private forest. On public forest, for example, if you take this point, it's a bit more than 20% of harvest level of volumes that are harvested on these diameter classes. So basically, all this data come from the National Forest Inventory, and the idea for the forest reference labels will be to freeze these codes. Just for your information, so in the dynamic management scenario, we expect to change these harvest weights and to harvest, but to have some more harvest where we can have, for example, in these places. So basically, the differences between these curves and this one will generate debit because there is an increase of harvest. In fact, it's a bit more complicated than this, than that, as you have to take into account the standing volume. So basically, when you are doing the modeling based on these graphics, you have two kinds of harvests. The first one will be a kind of natural extra harvest, just coming from the holding or the aging of the standing volume. And another one will be a differentiation or just a change. This one that is policy driven of harvest intensities. So we have done this on all forest water for all species. When you're doing this at the whole mainland forest, you will have these figures. So in constant silviculture, from now to 2035, there is a rise of availability for harvest, up to 8 million cubic meters for 2035. And in the dynamic management, as we want to increase all harvest levels where we can be, we'll have an extra harvest at the end of. So basically, if we take 2026, we have 5 millions of cubic meters that come just from the age effect of forests, and we will want to add up to 7 cubic meters from dynamic management. So the idea for forest open levels, if we are matching the LULUCF population, is that all these 5 will be included in the forest open levels, but these 7 will be out of forest open levels. 2026 will generate some debits. So just a translation of this. So now we are in forest in a carbon balance, so in megatons of CO2 per year, from 1990 to 2030. So you have this forest, this historical inventory, and here it's a prospective part. You can recognize the constant silviculture scenario. So we are continuing with the same harvest levels than previously, and the dynamic management where we want to increase the harvest levels. In the forest, when we are doing the estimation of the debits from the differences between the two groups, we have around 100 megatons of CO2 on the whole period. And that's these figures we have used for negotiations these 2 last years. So in our calculation, when we try to negotiate the LULUCF regulation, we consider that our projections of debits on managed forest lands will be around 100 megatons. So to meet the LULUCF non-debit rule, according to Article 4, we project to use several flexibilities. So the M3 LULUCF flexibilities, with some credits from other land categories, so especially grasslands, and harvested with products also and goods. But we are also projecting to use the managed forest land flexibility and to compensate a part of these debits following the criteria in the LULUCF regulation. So all these works have been based on the system 2016, and as I was saying, there was some need of adaptation to follow the DG Climate guidance and the LULUCF regulation. So just a comment that all the previous study was only on mainland forests, and we will have to see the same exercise for overseas forests. For this, we will have a simplified variant depending on the data we have, and with following these assumptions that all the forest area without any data will be assumed to be non-anthropogenic dry. If we take the 6 steps that Anu has presented in this morning from the guidance developed by DG Climat, we will reuse the 116 strata for the forest certification of the first step. For the documentation, we will have to fit to 2000 and 2009, so we will have some change in comparison with the previous study. We will still have some harvest weights that will be specific to strata, species diameter. And as we have a new methodology in forest inventory starting in 2005, in some cases we will just take these data and not the data before. So 2005 to 2009 instead of 2000 and 2009. For the methodology, we will take the same methodology than the previous study with some updates, as we have now some new works, especially on the density dependency assumptions of forest rules. I will come back on this. For the step 4 about calibration and validation, so we have to test the model's ability to reflect 2000 and 2009, so the reference period ability on national forest inventory and national inventory of emissions and absorptions. So there is a kind of double check. And for the period between the reference period and the commitment period, so the 2010 and 2016, we'll compare the projections through the modeling and the observations and try to explain them. Mainly it will be a change of forest management practices. For the step 5, so the projections, we will consider 2010 as a starting year for our projections, so just after the reference period. We'll take the assumptions of a dynamic development of managed forest lands, so it's linked with forest. I think it's box 19 in your guidance. It's assumption 2, the option 2 in box 19. That means that we will anticipate the holding of young forests, and the managed forest lands perimeter will be fluctuating through the commitment period. What else? So the management practices are assumed to be constant unless there is a clear lack of sustainability in order to match with this criteria. So if for example we have some extra or over harvest in some places, we can cap this in order to stay in sustainable management criteria. Again, step 6 is just a calculation of forest fund levels. The aim of the workshop is to discuss about the consequences of LULUCF regulation for private parties or for forest-based sector. And one key element of LULUCF regulation is that in fact there is no accounting or reporting obligation for private parties. So basically there is no direct consequences of the LULUCF regulation for forest stakeholders. But there is some consequences through indirect regulations. So I just gave you 2 examples. In the LULUCF regulation, to use the managed forest land flexibility, the member state has to include some specific measures to ensure the conservation or enhancement of forest sinks and reservoirs. And so in the LULUCF regulation, it's about the 525 2013 regulation that has been transformed in governance regulation. Another example is the link with WET 2, so the renewable energy, where there is some LULUCF requirements in sustainability criteria for forest requirements. I will just elaborate on this example, as we are currently developing the new low carbon development strategy, so it's still in preparation and it will be published next year. This strategy, all sectors confirmed aim for carbon neutrality by 2050, so that has been an announcement. For forest sectors, there will be a lot of specific measures mainly around with 4 recommendations. The first one is to ensure the long-term conservation and enhancement of carbon sinks. So it's in order to have access to the management plan flexibility. The second one is to maximize substitution effects in order to have some credits, for example, through an increased use of longer life wood products. And the third one is something to be more dynamic and to evaluate the implementation of all induced policies and to adjust them regularly in order to achieve all expected results and benefits, including biodiversity. So mainly all the direct consequences of climate policy on forests will be influenced through this strategy, but not LULUCF regulation. Okay, so last slide, and I thank you for your attention. If you have some questions, I will try to answer it.
Thank you. And please, I ask you to have a seat for a while, because also we will be hearing about the Swiss experience, meaning that Olivier Gardy is from Bern University of Applied Sciences. He's going to give his speech first, and then we'll see to the questions. Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction, and also thank you for inviting me here to present you about how we feel in Switzerland with LULUCF. You know, we are not part of the EU climate policy, and we are not subject of the regulation that has been discussed this morning. So this discussion is new to me, and it was very interesting for me also to be here and to hear about that. But okay, I will show you how we deal with LULUCF, particularly also with the carbon pool of harvested products in our greenhouse gas inventory and in our accounting towards the obligations on the UNFCCC. And I will also show you a bit how we deal with LULUCF in the frame of our national climate policy. So what are the instruments actually we are planning to implement there. So, since 2013, Switzerland is accounting for harvested wood products in the LULUCF sector. You see also in Switzerland, LULUCF provides important sink of CO2. The majority, that's the blue bars, coming from forest management sink, and the orange ones, that is the harvested wood product. So in Switzerland, this LULUCF sink compensates for about 4% of our national greenhouse gas emissions. It's still relevant, not as in Finland, where I heard figures of 10, maybe more percent, but it's also important for us. So the question is, how will that continue with regard to that our forests, they are quite old now, and we have a very high growing stock also in our forests, and all the challenges that we face with climate change, increased mortality, and so on. So actually we don't know how this will continue. This is now the focus on the harvested wood products. It makes up about 10-15% of our LULUCF sink. And you see also here, actually, the trend is already visible, that it, particularly after the economic crisis in 2008, and then what followed, that actually less timber was used, and that maybe already in near term, this harvested wood product, which was actually a sink in the past, might also become a source. This is mainly due to the fact that you might know it for the calculation of this harvested wood product sink. We have on one side the inflow, so the wood, the domestic harvest that is transferred to long-lived wood products, and on the other side we have the outflow, which finally is the result of the composition of the harvested wood products that have already been harvested or produced earlier. And you see we are going close to a balance, so not sure whether this harvested wood products will act as a sink without further political measures. In Switzerland, the international climate targets are implemented through our national climate policy. This is mainly the CO2 law that has been first enacted in the year 2000 and is now under revision for implementing also the commitments that Switzerland accepted within the Paris Agreement, within the national determined contributions. So that's currently under negotiation in our parliament, but actually the instruments that are foreseen are the same that we already used in the past. So these are the instruments of the Swiss climate policy. The main thing is this CO2 tax or CO2 levy that can go up, it is flexible and can go up to 210 Swiss francs or about 200 euros per ton CO2, and it is the income. It's not actually taxed. The income is redistributed to the population. Then in the energy sector, it is complemented with other instruments. We also have an emission trading system where big polluters finally have an assigned cap and can trade the assignment, and this will also be linked with the EU ETS in the near future. And for the buildings, for the private buildings, there is some a program that provides some financial incentives for doing energy-related renovations. And then for the transport sector, which you see has the biggest part of our national emissions, there we have a special instrument. One is the emission regulations for newly imported cars, and the other is that importers of fossil motor fuels have the obligation to compensate part of those emissions with climate projects they implement in Switzerland apart, and climate projects they implement abroad. So we have kind of a national compensation system in Switzerland. And there, maybe the link also to the forest or more to the wood sector, there are some projects that provide such compensation credits. Projects that promote biogas in the agricultural sector, that promote the use of energy wood, that also promote the use of harvested wood products. And then these specific instruments are complemented by some measures in other sectoral laws, but that are at the moment not further defined or specified. Switzerland has been accounting for LULUCF sinks and also the sink of harvested wood products since 2013 in the frame of the work of the Kyoto Protocol. And you see here that actually the instruments of the CO2 law have been effective in a way that the emissions since 1990 have not been increasing, but rather slightly decreasing. But as you see here, for achieving the Kyoto target in the first commitment period, we strongly depended on those compensation projects, also CDM and JI, and we also depended finally on our forest carbon sink in order to achieve those targets. In the second commitment period, Switzerland is also accounting for all those LULUCF carbon stock changes with a reference level type of net accounting, meaning that we assume that in the second commitment period the sink effect of the forest will be a bit less than in the reference period 2009. And that increase also kind of a projection, a 30% increase of timber harvested, mainly due to the age structure of our forests. We have not yet defined, up to my knowledge, a reference level for the post-2020 objectives. It will be done in the similar way as we did it for the second commitment period of the Kyoto Protocol, and there is also in the national determined contribution Switzerland mentioned that it is intended that the LULUCF sector will be about zero. So we also have this kind of no debit rule, but this is not fixed somewhere in regulation. it's just an intention. So, kind of a summary, Switzerland is accounting for all those different climate change mitigation effects from the forestry and the wood sector. But when we come then to the incentives that are provided by the Swiss climate policy, up to now there is no incentives provided to forest owners to further increase the sink, CO2 sink of the forest. But this is currently under discussion in the parliament, whether this should be intensified or not. Then substitution effect of material and energy, this is done indirectly through the instruments of the CO2 tax, for example, that should finally increase also the market price for energy wood, what effectively has been observed in the past, so some indirect effects here. And for the CO2 sink of harvested wood products, there since 2014 a project has been or is implemented that provides some compensation credits for this national compensation scheme. So this is this Swiss wood sink project that has been implemented by the Swiss Wood Industry Association, and where actually the sector is compensated for measure that is taken by the wood industry in order to increase the production of harvested wood products above a certain reference level, a reference level that is also determined by historic development, but also projections due to how the market, mainly the wood price, is developing. So they get compensated for those increase of harvested wood products, the carbon stocks. And you see here, that is actually the sawn wood that has been produced in Switzerland out of domestic wood, domestic harvest, and that is the blue bars are the historic development when this project was designed. The red bars is what would the reference level actually for the future, which is mainly a business as usual reference level, and you see that this is actually the economic development, the financial return in dollars per cubic meter sawn wood produced, so it corresponds actually to the trend that was observed. And the green bars here is now what actually has been produced by the Swiss sawmill industry, and you see that actually this project had some effect, and effect in a very important time actually when the sector was in a crisis, economic crisis. Okay. Summary: Switzerland is accounting for all those LULUCF and harvested wood products, carbon changes, but there are no specific instruments in place under the climate policy, just indirect incentives maybe. And this also, it was already in 2007 that a study was conducted in Switzerland to see what actually could be the contribution of the forest and the wood sector to the climate mitigation objectives of Switzerland. And they're also similar to the study presented by the Tuning Institute this morning. Some different scenarios were tested. The green one here, for example, this is reducing the harvest intensity. The simulations here showed that this is actually the measure that provides the biggest mitigation effect in the short term, but in the long run, when we look at the end of the century, it's more the scenarios that try to increase the wood harvest that have a better mitigation effect, and this is mainly due to this substitution effect. So the conclusion of the study was also that building up carbon stocks, whether we do that in the forest or we do that in the harvested wood product carbon pool, is somehow limited, and in the long term substitution effects due to material and energy substitution outcompete these increases of carbon stocks. And recommendations based on those conclusions is actually that one should try to maximize wood increment in the forest and use it efficiently, meaning first convert it to long-lived products, recycle it, and then at the end waste wood that cannot be further used, convert it to energy. And I think this is nothing new. Also the IPCC in its fourth assessment report came to the same conclusion. A sustainable forest management strategy aimed at maintaining or increasing forest carbon stocks while producing an annual sustained yield of timber, fiber or energy from the forest will generate the largest sustained mitigation benefit. So, conclusion, and I think where we in Switzerland also have to work on, is that we come away a bit from this thinking just in the boxes, in the forest box, in the wood sector box, in the energy box, but trying to have the whole picture in mind, and mainly also take into account those substitution effects from forest management, from producing wood products that are currently not accounted as such in the forest greenhouse gas balance. Okay, that was it from my side. Thank you very much for your attention.
Excellent, Oliver. I just have a clarifying question. I was a little puzzled with the math there. You were saying your forests are aging, your harvest is increasing, but yet you have less timber stored in harvested wood products. How is that possible?
Harvest is decreasing. Since 2008 there was a strong decrease in harvest and also in wood production. So
I see. But you're projecting that your harvest could go up.
That was the projection actually, okay, when we developed the reference level for the second Kyoto period, that harvest would go up by 30%, but finally it did not happen.
Okay, as it didn't happen anywhere in Europe, I suppose.
Yeah.
But thank you. Any questions to the speakers that you might want to have before? Piotr?
Thank you. I would have a quick question to Florian. He mentioned that no impact is foreseen for the private forest owners, landowners or operators. How it is with the public? I mean, particularly ONF.
No, it's for private parties, but there is no direct impact for any forest stakeholder. In fact, the LULUCF is just an exercise of accounting and reporting at the level of state. So there is no direct consequences, but after there is some indirect elements through unallocated regulations, because the states will want to promote some policies in order to have some consequences at the LULUCF accounting or climate policy framework. But for forest stakeholders, be them private or public, all the measures will be included in the national strategy for climate and for forest.
Thank you. Any further questions? Salvatore?
Yeah, it's still Salvatore Martin from European State Forest Association. Also have a clarification question for Florian. Actually, in the consequences, you mentioned there was this on the governance, and then you also mentioned the long-term strategy, low-carbon strategy of France. I was just curious why there is this emphasis just only on biodiversity, why there is no, for example, as it was said in the previous presentation, more on multifunctionality, why there is only this? Is there a specific reason, or why there is kind of climate and biodiversity in a long-term strategy? Thank you.
So you're speaking about the third recommendation from the long-term strategy we are elaborating, and yes, that's the focus of the new government, the French government, to have to highlight the issue of biodiversity, and also in forest biodiversity. But all the national strategy for climate will also deal with other elements. For example, the second recommendation is how to increase the wood mobilization through supply and demand. So there is some economic aspects, be them linked with trade or to the use of wood products, and the increase of the substitution effects, for example. And the third one was, in fact, kind of negotiations with our French NGOs that are very strict on biodiversity, and also because it corresponds to priority for our government.
Thank you. Any further questions? If not, then I have a last question, Heikki, for you, and then we'll break for coffee for 15 minutes. Heikki, you brought up the fact that with the LULUCF regulation, it was rather political than a scientific decision in the end, the way they drew the conclusions. You mentioned the, well, we all know the three S's, the sequestration, sink, or storage, and substitution. Who do you think is going to decide upon that in Finland? Is it also going to be a national political decision, or is it going to be a scientific decision?
Which one?
How to combine the sequestration, storage, and substitution amongst themselves.
I do believe that it will be the political decision in the end. We are, for the time being, updating our national forest strategy, and that tries to have the holistic approach to the forest-related issues. That will be only until 2025, but that work is a process. We hope to conclude it by the end of the year. So that's sort of the forestry response also to the climate issues, but biodiversity. At the same time, there are other policy areas that we try to promote the transformation towards bioeconomy, and those are also driven by the policy perspective, but at the same time, as it requires a lot of innovation and knowledge, there are some programs that we want to foster also the innovation on those areas, which is then, of course, together with the real actors in the forest sector. So, of course, I could imagine that the policy is prepared jointly by a full sector with the stakeholders, and then the implementation will require actors from all fields.
Thank you. I guess the conclusion from that is that as soon as things get too complex to be handled by more than a few, then the politicians come into play and start making decisions themselves. Okay, with that joke to the end of it, let's have a quick coffee for 40 minutes. Be back here at 4:15.